Hello. Um, I was wondering what would want to come through this week, and I've really been feeling the pressure of Sedna's energy, and I wanted to explore what was happening with her and the Uranus transit because Uranus has just moved into Gemini. We did that, we covered that. Bit of the story and is crossing the Algol, which is the eye of Perseus, the Medusa's eye, and then it's crossing the Pleiades, which always feels like a very loving, dolphin-like, helpful energy for us here on Earth. And then at some point it's going to conjunct with Sedna, and I was like, oh, I wonder when this is going to be. So I'm going to look at the specifics of that astrologically and give us some timelines of this powerful meeting. The lightning strike of Uranus, the clarity that can come with the Uranus transit and that kind of inner liberation from chains which have held us. And Sedna certainly has lots of those kind of psychological complexes and chains in her inner world. And I feel those moving in myself. It's interesting because what is predicted and what I feel as Uranus moves into Gemini is like this tilting of the scales, like suddenly things can really change. Um, and I was speaking to another astrologer, Polden, who lives around here, who's about 20 years older than me. And he was saying that in the Second World War, Uranus moved into Gemini, and it was the battles of Stalingrad and I've forgotten the other one he said. It's there in my head a sec ago. But anyway, these were two battles that really turned the tables of the war. They were key points in which um, Hitler started to lose ground. So I thought that was really interesting that it was Uranus in Gemini that started to trigger a change in the shifting of the scales, if you like. And of course, that can come through so many forms. And we live in a totally different world now of vastly advanced technology, and so these forms in which this change can come through technology, communication, music, they can come through all kinds of ways. And I'm looking out for them now. I keep going, that's Uranus in Gemini moment or energy. And yeah, and sometimes it might turn towards something we feel is positive and something negative, but I'm really trying to just kind of stay in a neutral place, like watching the changes and the highs and lows, if you like, of how things unfold and where they might lead, and putting my own prayers and intentions always into peace for humanity, for our betterment. And I know all of you kind of really feel that and do the same. And I think as priestesses, we can play an important role, like manifesting from the invisible realms. But we can also play a really important role in transfiguring, transmuting our own shadow material. And I think Sedna is very rich on this level. She does resonate with some of the other asteroids. So the asteroids are kind of closer to us, like Lilith, for example. Um, but she's right out there in the furthest reaches of the solar system. And when she was discovered, it completely changed how astronomers thought about our solar system, how we think about it. It opened, it was one of the first of the trans-Neptunian objects. So what we thought was reality suddenly went boom. This is a new reality. And Sedna was, the one who brought that in, really. So she's very powerful collectively. So I'm going to do a little presentation, just go through some of the stuff about Sedna, a bit of a myth, what's kind of calling me right now in the kind of transformation of the victim story of Sedna is really what's calling me. And looking at this Gene Key 20, where all of this is taking place, and the specifics of when Uranus is going to hit that exact conjunction. Okay, so let me share this. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this. Go back to the beginning. Okay, so if you've been with me a while, I did a presentation a while back when Sedna was on the point of moving into Gemini. It's about a year ago. And I was talking about Sedna, a body called Mors Somnus, who's also a trans-Neptunian object. Mors Somnus means death and dreaming. And also one of these extreme trans-Neptunian objects called Alicanto, who is a phoenix, like a magical firebird who eats gold and silver. So Sedna is still traveling with Mors Somnus and Alicanto. I'm going to leave Alicanto out today. But what I want to look at is this idea of tipping the scales. And those scales we can immediately start to tip inside ourselves when we agree to meet the shadow material of Sedna. Okay, so a little bit about Mors Somnus first. So he's named after a Roman deity or night goddess, sorry, whose children were Mors, which means dream, and Somnus, death. So Mors Somnus is walking the path between life and death very closely. It's all about shamanic experience through sleep and dreams. And it's got the kind of similarities with Chiron as a shamanic body, and also I'd say Hygeia, healing through sleep and dreams. But we're talking about this kind of walking between the worlds. And it really resonates with Sedna because she lives in the space between life and death as well. So it's interesting, like this is a long-term transit that she's been with Mors Somnus, almost like emphasizing that we're in this time of death and rebirth, and these bodies can help us with those transitory energies. Okay, so Sedna is number 90377. So it's quite a small range because she moves very, very slowly. I meant to look it up, but something I think like 8,000 years her transit around the sun. And so she's moving very slowly. So most of us will be born within a kind of quite small range of her either being in Aries or Taurus. And you can find out where she is in your chart. You can go to www.tarakaio.io. So the IO bit's really important. Otherwise, you won't get this website up. And you can do a free chart of your own. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll find the trans-Neptunian objects. It's in like numeric order. and you'll see where your own Sedna is. So a little bit about Sedna. She, as I said earlier, she really transformed the whole landscape of astronomy and our understanding of the solar system. So her power is very big in that. You know, she overthrows all the old rules and expectations. So she was called the ninth planet when she was discovered in 2003, and she's 5,000 times the mass of Pluto. So she's much bigger than Pluto. She's named after an Inuit goddess, and this is from the northern Europe, like Sweden, Norway, those countries. Um, and she was named after this Inuit goddess because where she's found is in a very cold, dark part of the solar system. And so this is an energy of Sedna, you know, she's really in this cold, dark, freezing waters. So collectively, this group of trans-Neptunian objects, they represent indigenous streams of wisdom flowing into our consciousness, healing the wound of separation. So Sedna's quite an interesting one because, you know, unlike in the Americas where you still actually have the indigenous wisdom keepers, they'd be really oppressed and everything else, but they're still actually pretty much there. The Sami in these countries like Norway, Sweden, Finland had almost completely vanished, and they are making more of a comeback now through their music and culture. But they kind of represent something that was lost, I feel, in the European culture. And so even though even some of you don't live in Europe, you know, our ancestral stream is through Europe, and recovering our own indigenous wisdom is really important. You know, we can connect with other wisdom keepers and traditions, understand them, but there's this kind of recovery of our own traditions that are feels important to me. And so it's interesting that she was one of the first ones. And another one of the first ones was Albion, who is from the British Isles. Um, so you've got two kind of European strands of indigenous wisdom. So a bit of the story of Sedna. Most of you will have some familiarity with it. So Sedna was very different to everyone else in her family and her tribe in that she didn't want to get married, and she was a huntress. You know, she used to love to go out on the ice on her own with her dogs and in her kayak. And so we immediately have an unusual female archetype, someone who's pushing the boundaries, who's breaking the feminine traditions and the tribal traditions. And you can imagine with the Inuit, you know, they're really living on the edge of survival in these very cold climates. So they probably don't welcome people challenging the way it's done because their survival kind of depends on everyone following the rules. But Sedna was a rule breaker. And because she's a rule breaker, she becomes exiled and rejected from her family. There's different stories. Some she goes off and marries. Eventually, she does marry this birdman, and her father goes to rescue her, but he doesn't quite have the bottle to do it. And so he throws her overboard and bashes her fingers off, which become the whales and the dolphins. So she has this very strong connection, I feel, with the cetacean. So it's interesting the connection I made earlier actually with the Pleiades, because I'm hearing of a few places, including where I live, where we're starting to see more dolphins and whales. And I know that where some of my colleagues live in Canada, they're seeing the same thing, like an increase in cetacean presence. And I feel that that is significant. And this is Sedna's higher frequencies, is this connection to these creatures. But she does have this thing, and there's one bit of the story that kind of really stuck with me because I see this quality in myself where let me go to the next slide. Yeah, so I got this image of Masha Dutoit's blog where the shamans have to brush Sedna's hair to keep her happy, and they have to kind of constantly be around her, taking care of her. And she's in this is how I feel into it. I often feel astrology and I feel it through my own emotional body too, that having been through this very oppressive experience as a female, that she is carrying this like rage and anger and bitterness and is very trapped in her own victim story, as I can become in my victim story. So this is kind of where I've been feeling Sedna at work in myself in the past year, and actually finding this victim energy, which I'd associate with Gene Key 55, as quite hard to work with, to dance with, and realizing actually that coming into freedom, which is the gift and the siddhi of the 55, is to do with being able to move out of this victim sense of self and move into something more empowering. And I really felt that when Sedna moved into Gemini, that I felt this possibility, this shift within myself and within the feminine consciousness, that we could start to do something different. There's something about forgiveness. There's something about coming up to the light, almost coming up from the ocean floor into the light, into the air element of Gemini. And Gemini is like virtually energetically the opposite of Taurus is fixed earth. It's very like, and Gemini is mutable air. So it's like everywhere, it's movement, movement. So we came from this fixed place into movement, and within that energetic shift, there's space, I feel, for new things to unfold with Sedna. And I'd be really interested, like, maybe don't have to answer this now, but or later, but to think about how that shift has happened for you in the last year, and maybe how that shift from watery, dark water, cold, freezing energy into the light of Gemini. Um, and then, for me, it's like I feel the shift, but part of me really wants to go back into this dark, like, rage of Sedna again. And really right now, but maybe on behalf of certain people in the world. Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's not as personal, the story, as when I first began with Sedna. I actually wrote something in my late 20s about Sedna's story alongside my own story with my father. And it was very personal then, feeling betrayed by my father. Um, but yeah, by the time he died a couple of years ago, I was definitely in a much better place with him. Um, as far as all that went, and had forgiven all that had transpired. And yeah, so the Sedna now, it's hard for me to put words on it, but she's still there really powerfully. And the thing is, it's not really individual. That's what we need to get about these trans-Neptunian objects. They're way beyond individual. You know, they are a field of consciousness in which men, women, everyone on the planet, we're all part of this field of energy. And we're, through our own body and emotional body, we're able to make adjustments to transmute parts of the energy field. But it's not to do with us personally, but we've agreed in this lifetime to do this work. Otherwise, it's unlikely you would be here if you hadn't agreed to that. And it's tough work sometimes, you know, it feels like really on an edge. Wouldn't it be so much easier to go back to superficiality? Well, it probably wouldn't actually, but that's Gene Key 20 shadow where Sedna is. So we can also work with this Gene Key energy, like moving from the shadow of this kind of shallowness, not really participating in life, being very materialistic, and we can move deeper into ourselves, into self-assuredness, and then into presence, which is a very beautiful feeling. And yeah, it's funny. I had a feeling of it in the sea the other day. It was like a millisecond of super presence in the sea. And I was like, oh, that felt good. And then it was kind of gone again. Um, but I think that's kind of what we're heading towards, is stabilizing this feeling of super presence. And when we get into that, my God, who knows what we'll be able to do. I think it will turn the scales, definitely. Okay, so let's get on to, so what is the healing for Sedna combined with the shocking, clarifying power of Uranus, who brings that like lightning strike, quantum leap initiations? So just to kind of recap, so she's a mythical chain breaker, especially around parents and marriage in the tribe. There's themes of exile and deep wounding from ejection. She's a huntress who doesn't want to marry, an unusual archetype for women. She is connected to cetacean beings and their role in our evolution. And as I say, I feel that's really important with Uranus moving over the Pleiades. The unfreezing of the emotional realm. She's connected to this big transition in the solar plexus and the processing of deep emotional wounds. She potentially rises from victim to victor. And she may literally be connected to the unfreezing of the polar regions and the wellness of the ocean and all its beings. So it was quite interesting when I went to look. I thought this conjunction would be soon, but it's actually next summer, 2026. So Uranus is going to turn retrograde and it's going to go back all the way to 26 degrees Taurus, which is Algol, the star Algol, the Eye of Medusa. And then it's going to start moving forward again, back over the Pleiades. And there's a real lineup, actually. I've just included some of them here next summer of Uranus, Sedna, more Somna, Urania, who is like a female Uranus connected with astrology, and Lilith, who really echoes a lot of these themes. So we've got a kind of year to really work and notice, be mindful, be present when this victimy kind of, I want my hair brushing, or I'm gonna sulk. Energy comes up. You might feel it differently, but I definitely have this like really sulky Sedna inside of me. And I'm like, oh wow, imagine all that energy that's being held in that, being liberated into, or just moving more freely instead of kind of tying me up in knots and creating drama in my life. Okay, so is there anything? Oh, I think that's it actually. So yeah, we've got a year to work with these energies and so we can be here together, supporting each other and sharing stories when that comes up. Um, yeah, I'll stop the recording because it'd be nice to invite you in. And one of you, just before we came on, was sharing with me how you're getting out, taking the initiative to get out of feeling overwhelmed like a victim. So that felt like a perfect echo, really. So maybe share that again for the others if you're willing. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. Here we go.